Sec. Okay, so thank you, Jane, for joining us today. Jane's coming to us from McMaster Children's Hospital, where she's been a social worker for the past 20 years. She works with children and youth who are facing cancer as well as their families. But a lot of what she's going to talk about today is also going to apply to our community. She's very passionate about helping young people through their cancer journey and dedicated to improving mental health services for cancer patients. Jane also has a private counseling service in Hamilton and is a mindful self-compassion trained teacher. So thank you, Jane, for joining us today. I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Brian. It's so funny doing these things over Zoom because, of course, I would love to be in person and seeing everybody in one room and interacting, but obviously, for obvious reasons, we've gone to this format. And just to say, I feel really privileged to be talking about self-compassion during COVID, because I know it's been a particularly challenging time for everybody, all for different reasons. And I came across self-compassion because of my own personal challenges that were happening and just needing to find a different way to cope. And it has really changed me professionally, but personally as well, and allowed me to deal with problems, I would say, a little bit more healthy, for lack of a better word. So this discussion really is speaking to caregivers, and I'm hoping that you can take something from it, and maybe at the end we'll have some good discussion about what you've heard today. So let me just see if I can. Okay. So what we're going to cover is the nature of caregiving. What is self-compassion? What gets in the way of self-compassion, and ways to become your own ally. Those are essentially the topics that I'll be talking about. Working at MAC with parents of children who have cancer has really just taught me a lot about the uniqueness of the role and what it's like to take care of a child who has extra needs. I haven't met anybody who doesn't take that role extremely seriously. And there's such a high degree of responsibility when you're the primary caregiver of your child, as it is, and then adding any kind of extra really brings along some pressure to make sure that their needs are being met at all times. I've not seen any relationship that matches that in terms of the feeling of responsibility. There's always a very strong need to relieve suffering and to protect. I found this in healthcare workers as well. You know, when we're around a child who's suffering, all of us just want to figure out, okay, what do they need? What do we need to do here to make this better? And for the parent, it's 100 times that feeling. You know, you really just want things to go smoothly. You really worry about your child being okay. I've had thousands of conversations probably with parents. I don't know if it's thousands, hundreds, probably thousands actually, who talk about, you know, it's always always hard to see your child physically suffering. It's really hard to see the emotional suffering, and that natural inclination to protect really gets kicked up a notch when you're seeing that in your child. Parents are extremely emotionally involved and invested. And what I mean by that point is, again, I've never talked to a parent who said, I'm good when they're good. I'm not good when they're not good. It's, you know, this sort of connection. And it makes perfect sense to me, actually, that would be the case. Again, connected to the point above, it's just, you know, you just are really invested in making sure that your child's okay. We're, as healthcare workers, invest in the same. It can be absolutely physically and mentally exhausting to be a caregiver. And other relationships can be strained. And I say this in a way, you know, sometimes when you're in a caregiving role, you're super, super focused on that person, on that child. And it's hard to divide yourself really amongst all the people in your life. It's hard to be everything to everybody. And so sometimes those relationships, those other relationships in your life might not get the connection, the attention that you would want under normal circumstances. I've seen a lot of different emotional responses in the caregiving relationship. The first that I'll speak about are guilt and shame. And when I first started in pediatric oncology, and these parents were talking about feeling guilty that their child got cancer, I was so confused. I'm like, how could you feel guilty? This was so not in your control. You had nothing to do with this. Why would you feel guilty? And then just from talking to so many parents, I realized that, again, it's that need to protect that's always there, no matter what happens, that you just feel like you have in some way failed to do that. That's a very typical response. And the shame can come from a variety of sources, but sometimes, again, it can feel like you're, in some ways, some people give off the feeling like, okay, you could have done something differently, or you should do something differently. We carry that shame in terms of that caregiving role. It can feel very isolated. It can feel like you're the only person who is facing these kinds of challenges. And so grateful when there's groups that have joined and banded to provide information and to provide support, because it's really important. That's a very typical feeling that I hear from parents all the time, that they just feel very alone in the situation. There can be some bitterness in the caregiving role, because of course it can be very time consuming. It's a lot of hours sometimes to make sure the people we're caregiving are doing okay. And so it can lead to a little bit of burnout and bitterness. There's a lot of vulnerability, fear, and anxiety. And those last 3 points, I think about some of what's happened during COVID, and parents have said, suddenly the whole world's living with uncertainty and everybody's flipping out. But this is how we live every single day. We're living with uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen next year. We've had to live with that for a while. And it's just interesting, because I've heard that so many times. And we take for granted that, as soon as something happens to our loved ones, we return into that caregiver, that immediate uncertainty is part of the package too. And with the uncertainty is a fair amount of anxiety. I've not met too many parents who don't carry around a fair amount of anxiety and worry throughout their journey, throughout the caregiving experience. So, those first 2 slides, I don't want to say it makes it sound like caregiving is negative, because it's not at all. It's, just putting it into a certain framework to understand, where people might feel stretched. But there's also the other side of caregiving that is so rewarding, and so it's nothing that you'll ever do. It's a privilege to care for people who need us, especially children. It brings so much meaning to life. You can actually get stronger family connections, right? This bond that happens because of the caregiving that's going on. And I have so many stories of like unexpected support. So someone will just show up with something that really makes a difference in a person's life, like a stranger, someone who just knows instinctually what the caregiver needs, and this will happen. So that's a real beautiful thing about caregiving, is that these things can happen for sure. Normally when we're, dealing with and taking care of people and trying to do it all, which is what we all try to do, we have our different ways of coping. And I've just put a few up there, but typically it's a lot of fumbling, it's just like, okay, I'm just trying to survive. I'll just, I'll use this method, or I'll do this method, and we're just trying to get through the days. Sometimes we'll get into a lot of avoidance and numbing feelings, like numbing of feelings, I should say. And that looks like, being on phones, or being on the internet, or really not wanting to go deep into what the emotions are really about. That's a really typical typical response. And a lot of parents have actually just said to me, I can't feel what I need, what I feel. Because if I did that, the floodgates would be open. I'd never be okay again, you know? And so we find these different ways to actually manage what we have to do day to day. We judge ourselves. Often we, you know, keep ourselves pretty small. We live with a lot of anger and fear sometimes, and really most of the time when we're stretched, we just try to survive is essentially what we try to do. What is self-compassion then when it applies specifically to caregivers? So this is a crazy notion because I read the first point, treat ourselves as we would a friend. You know, it's nothing we've been trained to do. We kind of learn, you know, to treat others and be understanding of others, but when it comes to ourselves, you know, you have to be hard on yourself to get things done. That's how you accomplish things. You know, you set up expectations, and you really don't use the same understanding that you would a friend towards yourself. This is a really common thing. But with self-compassion, we're cultivating that feeling. We're treating ourselves just like we would if we were listening to a friend who's telling us about a problem. We would so easily say, oh, you know, gosh, you know, it sounds like you've done your best, or that sounds like you've really worked hard at that. We would never speak to a friend as we would to ourselves. So that's a really important component of self-compassion. When we have self-compassion, we have a deep understanding that we are human. Like, we really are human. We're not superhuman. We're just human beings, right? We're not perfect. We're not going to get everything done. We're not going to be able to, you know, do all that we think we can do in a day or in a week. And it's a really important thing to not just think about, but also embrace that we are human. When we have self-compassion, we don't sit in judgment of ourselves. So judgment comes up. You know, we will judge ourselves, you know, for all kinds of things. But when we have a little bit of a more, you know, cutting ourselves a break approach, we can actually move away from the judgment a little more quickly. When we make a mistake, we don't overly criticize or berate ourselves. Mistakes are really tough on people, and that's where you can get some of the really harsh criticism. And we are really compassionate to our own experience, not just those of others. And, you know, when you think about it and you hear a story or someone, or you're hearing a story about somebody, you can so easily say, gosh, like that must be a difficult situation that they're in. But for our own story, we don't often offer ourselves that same compassionate response. Like, gosh, this is hard. This is hard on me. You know, we're not often able to say that to us. So, you know, considering we're on Zoom and most of your cameras are off and you're just in the comfort of your own home, and as I start talking about concepts of self-compassion and how to be our own friend and, you know, cut ourselves a break, maybe just for a moment think, you know, how do I think of myself actually? Do I cut myself a break? How do I speak to myself? And you don't have to answer these questions, they're private. How do I relate to myself? How do I treat myself? This last one's really important. When I make a mistake, how do I react? You know, I really like reflection and use it a lot because I think it's important to every once in a while just pause and say, like, how am I thinking of myself right now? You know, have I just been on this bandwagon of being really hard on myself for everything? You know, where am I at? That last question, when I make a mistake, how do I react? That's usually when we're hardest on ourselves, when we haven't done things as perfectly as we want. And I came up with this line for people sometimes who will come to me and will talk about their mistakes. And I'll always say, okay, well, it wasn't criminal. You know, you're not a criminal in what you did. Like, you're just a human being. And I use that on myself quite a lot for my self-talk, which is like, okay, you know, you haven't killed anybody. Like, let's just slow down here. So you find these little ways understanding how you relate to your own self. In terms of the self-compassion world, so Kristen Neff is a researcher, and she's done just a ton of research on the topic. Like, just, I think, again, it's thousands of articles. Okay, maybe not thousands, maybe it's hundreds. I'm not good with, like, the general making predictions about how much it is, but a lot. She, and you can YouTube her and find her in all kinds of, on the internet pretty easily. She breaks down self-compassion into 3 components, and 3 really important components. The first component is mindfulness, which is such a buzzword. People don't even know, like, what are we talking about here with mindfulness? In this context of self-compassion, what she's suggesting is that when we have awareness that we are struggling, we can actually do something about that. And the awareness comes from just being able to tune in a little bit, look inward, and see what's happening for ourselves. Usually normally what we do is we tend to over-identify. So we're in a problem and we've got this over-identification, we're totally enmeshed. We don't have a lot of awareness about what we're feeling or what we're experiencing. That's a normal thing. We do have to do a lot of that to function in the day. We can't always be aware of how we're feeling and attending. So that's the first component of this, the way she frames self-compassion. The second component is common humanity. And this is just the reminder that we're not alone. Maybe another person's suffering is not exactly like ours, but other people know the experience. They know what it's like to caregive for somebody. They know what it's like to feel the pressure. They know what it's like, what it means to try and relieve someone's suffering. And when we conjure that up and think, I am not alone here, I know other people do this, it can give us real comfort. It can give us a real sense of compassion. And the third component is self-kindness. So self-kindness is basically self-explanatory. Instead of being judgmental or harsh, we cultivate this kindness just as we would for other people. This feeling of I'm okay just the way I am, and that can create quite a feeling of relief and a feeling of self-love that sometimes we're just not used to. Self-compassion, it can sound like a very soft word, right? And people can have a reaction to that, like, oh gosh, like, what is this mushy stuff? Now we're going in the woo-woo land here. But self-compassion is more than just being soft and being love and compassion, and I love how she uses this analogy of the yin-yang symbol, because it's a balance of both. Sometimes we need to be with ourselves in a compassionate way by comforting, soothing, and validating. Sometimes we need to crawl up in bed with a blanket and just be like, I'm shutting the world out. I know I've done that quite a lot during COVID. But sometimes we need the yang, which is much more of the protecting, the providing, and the motivating oneself. More of the action in the world, acting in the world. And we need both those things, in order for it to be really self-compassion. Because too much of the, validation and just comforting myself all the time, it's not always going to get me, what I need. Sometimes we need to, say no, or set a boundary, or do something. That's the most self-compassionate thing we can do. So we kind of flip through both of these two things, and they just balance each other out perfectly. What gets in the way? Like, why wouldn't we just do this? Like, it all just sounds so, okay, so we got this self-compassion. We can't forget we're not alone, and, we have to be kind to ourselves, and we have to do all these things. Well, why wouldn't we just be doing this? Well, not shocking. And maybe you've already discovered your inner critic. Maybe you know exactly what your inner critic's about. We all have sort of this inner voice, inner critic, whatever you want to call. And mostly, as a general statement, mostly we develop this inner voice from our caregivers, early caregivers, who were messaging us different things, and we sort of incorporated this into our self-talk. And sometimes this inner critic can be a little loud, it can be a little obnoxious, it can be harsh, it can be exaggerated, it can create these high expectations, and we don't even realize that we're doing it. As an example, not to get too personal, but I'm happy to share this because it happens and still happens. I'm much better at catching myself. It can still happen where it's like, you're doing something, like even during COVID, I dropped like a massive jar of pickles, a jar of salsa, like all kinds of things just dropped in the kitchen with big messes. And my first thing will be like, that was just so stupid. Like, why aren't you paying attention? And so I'll catch myself kind of speaking this way. And it's like, gosh, like, tone it down here. It's a $5 jar of pickles. Everything is fine. But we do this so automatically. We're quick to judge. Let's say that. What other things get in the way is that sometimes, especially if you're in a role of a caregiver, we think we have to be tough. And we don't want to go too soft. We need to be tough because this is hard and I need to get stuff done and I need to have control and I need to just make this happen. And so we don't want to let any feelings in. We don't want to let ourselves off the hook because we've got to get all the stuff that we got to get done. And that can really, those kinds of messages, beliefs, the inner critic, all these things sort of seep in and just keep us in a place of being much more understanding towards others than ourselves, really. I wish I could ask you if this is all making sense, but we decided for flow that maybe we'll just do the presentation and take questions at the end. As I said to you, there's just a lot of research behind self-compassion, and it's really powerfully linked to well-being. So more positive states like happiness, life satisfaction, and optimism, associated with fewer states like depression, anxiety, stress, shame, and negative body image. And it's also linked to better physical health. So while we have these concerns that if I become a self-compassion person, am I going to be too soft? There's evidence to suggest it's the opposite. It's the opposite. You're going to perform better. You're going to be better. You're going to feel better. You're going to want better. One of the side effects that I've noticed, and this is not the reason why I went on this journey. I really did go on this journey for my own personal reasons. But one of the great side effects is that I have become more compassionate towards people, because I feel compassionate towards myself. So I can see people and think, I know your experience because I recognize it now. I see it in myself and I can connect with you in that way. And that's been a really beautiful thing, to be honest. It's one of the best things that's come out of all of this. So how do we become our own ally? I came up with this little acronym because there always has to be some acronym we can use. And it's ROAD. And the reason why I like ROAD is because I always think of, I don't remember the poem or who even wrote it, but like, I always think of like paths and road, how we go down and there might be like two paths and that we make choices, and how I do think about this sometimes as me trying to make conscious choices towards a self-compassionate path for my good and for the good of everybody. And so road is recognize the negative self. This is how we become our own friend. Recognize our negative self-talk, especially when we make a mistake. Like when we drop the jar of pickles, recognize what we're saying to ourselves and offer yourself the same compassion you would a friend. If your friend was telling you anything, the first thing you would do is be understanding. The first thing you would be doing is understanding. And so we're offering, it's like offering yourself that exact same initial response, which is, oh gosh, like that sounds hard. Yeah. Allow yourself to believe that you are doing your best. And allow is interesting because, our brains, like they're tricky little things. They really like to keep us in our old habits. Like we like to stay in the way we do things because it's comfortable. And so even though theoretically I can say, oh, I want to cultivate self-compassion, I have to learn how to allow that to happen, because it means letting go of some old ways. And I don't know. I'm familiar with all that. Like even the berating of myself, I know what that looks like. I know how that's all going to go. This whole new thing, I don't know what that means or how I'm going to be. And so allowing is a really important thing, a really important thing to think about and to push yourself towards. And believing that you are doing your best. I probably say that to myself, I don't know, a lot, maybe thousands. But doing my best. Sometimes if I can't find any comforting thought, I go right down to the basic of, I know I'm doing my best. Like I can't do any more. Like this is the best I have. It's not perfect. It's not what everybody wanted. I've disappointed so and so. I haven't been perfect there, but it's my best. It's the most I can do. And the D is for discover your compassionate voice in your words. And in your words is really, really important. Like, so if you were to search up Kristen Neff and you were to do some of her different exercises, or even any kind of thing, you want to find your own language. I tend to add some F-bombs in mine, like this effing sucks, when I'm trying to validate myself. But your words might be very different. And so you want to make sure that when you're kind of trying to cultivate this compassionate voice, you're using your words, not my words that make sense for you, words that, again, you would extend to somebody else that have meaning for you. So these are some of the ways that we become our own ally. I was going to teach you a practice self-compassion, and I'm sure I can send out some notes as well with the link to this specific exercise. But I just love it. It's called the self-compassion break. And it is to be used in a moment. Those moments when you're just like overwhelmed and you just don't think you can take it for another minute. I tend to do this practice with my hand on my heart. Some people don't feel comfortable with physical touch, but physical touch actually gives us a dose of oxytocin, which is the good chemicals in our brain, like that help us cope. And so my self-compassion break, there's three sentences that we say to ourselves during the self-compassion break. And the first sentence recognizes, and it might say something like, this is really hard. I'm really overwhelmed. Or I might say, yeah, this sucks. This is really difficult. Whatever your first sentence, but recognizing that the moment is challenging. The second sentence says, I'm not alone. I know I'm not alone in this. And again, when we're so overwhelmed, it can be really helpful to think, I know I'm not the only person facing this right now. Immediately, even as I sit here in front of this computer, when I think of that, it brings me a little bit down. My shoulders feel a little more down. I just feel a little comforted by that. And then the third line is, may I be kind to myself. May I be kind to myself. And that's a reminder again, just to treat ourselves with what we deserve. So I will definitely figure out how to send you the link to that. So Kristen Neff does a self-compassion break as a little 5-minute meditation, which is also a beautiful thing. And then some people have also used it as a journaling exercise. So they'll write, this moment really sucks. I know I'm not alone, and may I be kind to myself, as a journal entry, which is another lovely way to do it. Another way to become our own ally, our own friend, is to maintain health habits, even in small doses. I was recently talking to a parent who is trying to work full-time at home. Her husband's trying to work full-time at home. They have 2 kids that need to be schooled. Her house got struck by lightning. literally. And it's just been quite a challenging time for her. And, you know, I wrote a simple message to her, which was, go to the basics. You know, when we're that stretched, sometimes we really just need to go to the basics of, like, I need to rest, I need to have some water, I need to have something to eat. You know, movement, I personally am a big advocate for, even if it's a few minutes of a walk. But it can help, again, bring some of that energy out of our bodies. And so people really struggle because it's like, I don't have a minute in the day. Like, I can't do the self-care stuff. That's a big complaint I hear about self-care. You know, I don't have time. If I had time, I'd love to have time to do the self-care. But I don't have time to do the self-care. And so I always talk about small doses. You know, small doses is great. Small, consistent doses is great. But whatever you can do to just, you know, add and make sure that there's some of that attention to your health is wonderful. Find your tribe. Find other people who know what it's like to be a caregiver. You know, maybe it's through a parent group, or online or whatever. It's really important that you are seen by somebody who knows what you're talking about, you know, because people who aren't faced with caregiving in this way won't get it to the same degree. And with that, it can feel, again, isolating, but also it can conjure up quite a bit of anger, because it's hard to explain it all. You know, why it's so stressful. It's difficult to do that time and time again. And so you need to find people who understand firsthand what you're talking about. I love, you know, I'm not going to remember this stuff on my own. I mean, I've been studying this for a long time. I've been doing a lot of the work, but I still need reminders. It's like, it gives me direction in my day, like what I'm meant to be doing, how I'm supposed to be living. And so I use these little Post-its on my mirror, on my fridge. My whole house is like basically, you know, just a bunch of messages like, Jane, go this way, stay here, come on. And I love this one. This one actually, Jane, your future self will thank you for this. This one came from Elizabeth Gilbert, the author. She was talking about how she thanks her future, or sorry, she remembers that her future self will thank her for all kinds of stuff, including just flossing her teeth. Because who wants to floss their teeth? Like, nobody, right? But you do it because you know your teeth are going to be better down the road. And you know, so with these visuals, you can kind of remember, oh yeah, this is what I'm doing. And so I use them quite a lot. Some of the messages you might think about posting around your house, honestly, you are enough. Like, truly, we forget, but we are so enough. I was listening to this meditation the other day from this Buddhist monk, and he just said, you're perfect right now. You're perfect, you know? And he used this analogy. I loved it. He said, you know, the clouds don't change the nature of the sky. And I love that, because I thought, you know, I'm not my perfect behavior every single day, but I know I'm good. And I love that analogy because it's true. The clouds come and they create the overcast, and you do all, but the sky is the sky. It's blue and it's perfect. And I love that. I love reminding myself, you are enough. You are not you are perfect now, in this moment, not when you blank, you know, lose 10 pounds, get that car, you know, manage to read your kid every second. That's not when you're perfect. You're perfect now. And that's a really important message to plaster somewhere in your house. You are totally capable. I see this all the time. We really underestimate our capability. We really underestimate. Like, we think, I'm not going to be able to handle that. I'm not going to be able to do that. You know, and sometimes people will, you know, feed into sort of this, in some ways, like, it's a weird thing. Sometimes people say, oh, well, you're only going to be handed what you can deal with. Well, it's not exactly what it is, or you're stronger than you think. Actually, for me, it's just, I know moment to moment, whatever is handed to me, I'm going to be capable of handling it. And just sitting in that belief is extremely helpful. And we are all love and compassion. We are all love and compassion. You know, we might forget, we might get traumatized, and our outward behaviors don't show that. But I really, really have lived in a way of understanding that everybody is love and compassion. Everybody, we all are. And that helps me. And it helps me to help others, because with that, I feel more confident and more useful than I've ever felt. I love this. I really love these words, and you can call it a poem, you can call it whatever you like, but I've used this quite a lot with caregivers, because it speaks to that responsibility that we feel. And so if you feel comfortable, I mean, you might be in your own homes, might be crazy there. If you wish, you can close your eyes as I read these words. Maybe take a deep breath. And the words say this: everyone is on their own life journey. I am not the cause of this person's suffering, nor is it entirely within my power to make it go away, even if I wish I could. Moments like this are difficult to bear, yet I may still try to help if I can. It's just, the words just remind us that, you know, whoever we're caregiving in whatever capacity, we are not the cause. We did not do anything. And we can't make it go away as much as we'd love to. All we can do is be our best selves and offer our best selves to whoever we are helping. So I hope that was helpful. I did purposely leave enough time for interaction and questions, whatever works for folks.
Yeah, so thanks so much, Jane. I think it was really good. It's a super important topic that none of us really get a chance to take the time to think about. So it was great that we were all able to get together today and spend this time together. So yeah, if anyone has questions or comments for Jane, you can just unmute yourself and ask, or you can use the chat. So I'll just open it up now.
Who wants to talk about self-compassion and open this up? Right? So hard.
There's just a question of if the presentation is going to be recorded. Yeah, we've recorded it, so it's going to go up on our social media probably sometime later this week, so you can watch for that.
I'm just reading one of the chats. We all tend to have more compassion for others than myself. It's so true. Like, it's so easy. You know, we can listen to someone's story and just be like, no, it's not that bad. Gosh, like, don't be so hard on yourself, you know. But move like, for us, it's like, no way. No way. Not letting myself off the hook. That's a funny thing.
So there was a question from Christina that came straight to me on the chat. Not sure exactly what she's saying. It says, tough subject. How can you lead a family member through it when in a safe way?
How can you help a family member become more self-compassionate?
I think that's the question, yeah.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. I mean, I think the, I'll just see if it's in the, got you. Okay. It is hard because I think, you know, some of it has to be driven by ourselves. And I know I'm personally struggling with that a lot. because I have a number of people in my life who I'm like, I just want you to take better care of yourself. I just want you to see you for all the gifts that you are. And I want to impose this, I want people to go to this and be helped. But I find that most, it's like a sort of self journey. Like you have to want to explore it and do it on your own. Like I said, we're really attached to our old methods. We like our old ways, we like our old habits. And so it's one of those things that has to be coming from the person themselves, which is just hard. Yeah.
Okay, so there's one more question on the chat from Heather. She says, how do you tame the inner critic of, I should be doing more? Look at what that person on Facebook is doing. I'm so behind.
Oh my goodness. I just want to go on a rant right now. Oh man. So it's, yes. It's so funny, right? Because even during COVID, you have people who, and I've had this conversation so much, people who are baking the bread and then they've got the kids and we're going on a hike and then we're doing the puzzles and we're doing all this stuff and it just all looks so fabulous. And then there's so many of us who are literally, trying to keep it all together. And for sure, the inner critic's going to rear its head and be like, boy, you really are falling behind. You really suck, actually, at this. And I think the taming of the inner critic really comes from, first of all, those reflection questions, which again, I'll include in an email or however we're going to get this to you. It's really important to start exploring, what is this inner critic trying to tell me? What is this inner critic doing for me? Is it helpful? And trying to discover our more compassionate voice, that's also going to motivate us, but just in a healthier way. But so it really is, how do I tame it? You have to explore what it's doing, what it's saying, what it's about, and then figure out what's my more compassionate voice. What's that capacity? What's that ability? What are they able to do? What is it able to do for me? And so I'm happy to put together like those questions and that way of exploring it more, because it is really helpful, to start recognizing when it's there. And as for the comparison thing, I don't know, like I'm just drawing from the question. I'll just say this, and I was just talking about this with a client last night. Comparison is a thief of joy. Comparison is a thief of joy. And I have literally spoken to myself, talk about my own words. I'll say to myself, that is none of your business what anybody else is doing. It's making no difference in how you go to bed tonight. No difference. You figure out how you need to be happy, not how other people are making themselves happy. And you can tell by my tone, right? Like I'm like firm. That's the yang compassion. It's like, no, stop, none of your business, move on. And I think we need a lot more of that. Because social media makes everything look grand, makes everything look perfect, So I hope that wasn't too much of a rant.
Okay, any more questions, anyone? Okay, well, thanks again. Jane, if you just want to email me the handout and then I can figure out a way to get to everyone in this group. I'll probably just email the list and then we'll probably attach it when we upload this video as well.
Perfect. Thank you all so much. That was so wonderful. Thanks
for
having me.
So thanks very much again. So our next session is going to be next Thursday, June 25th. It's going to be with Susan Norwell talking about balanced literacy for students with complex needs. So I see many of you on this have already registered for that. If you have not, you can take the opportunity right now to do that. And we're going to be recording that one as well. So thanks everyone for joining. Thanks again, Jane.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Thanks, guys. Take care of yourselves.
All right, bye.